welcome back. This is another one of our interviews with Kevin. Today, when we left off, there was you were building up. You had been working on the Palladium system in the background, coming out of your D&D game, and you went to publish the Palladium Fantasy game, and came across the fact that it was going to cost some serious moolah. And Eric said, "Well, why don't you do something serial?" And that wasn't what you wanted to do for Palladium, but you had this Mechanoids idea. So let's start. Where did this idea for Mechanoids even come from?
Actually, it's funny. So yes, you're right. I wanted to do a nice, big, thick book, and did not have the resources to do that. And Eric had suggested I serialize Palladium Fantasy, and I couldn't do it. It just wasn't what I had in mind. It's just not what I wanted to do. And so I said to Eric, because we were bouncing ideas around, I said, I don't want to do that, but maybe I could serialize something else. But what should I do? And Eric said, "Yeah, Kev, how about science fiction? You love science fiction." and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'll give that some thought." And I gave it some thought. I don't know where the heck it came from, the ideas, because I didn't have it before this. I sat down and thought about some stuff, and I was always a big Alien fan. So I think, Giger and his artwork was an influence, because the Mechanoids kind of have a little bit of a Giger look. My business partner Sean was looking through the Mechanoids and some of the art inside, and he's like, "Man, it has really kind of a H.R. Giger look to it." And I'm like, "Yeah, really? You think so?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, that was part of my inspiration." And he's specifically talking things like the mechanoid organism. Technically they're cyborgs, but they create all these machines and giant robots, and they've been so mutated that they don't even resemble human beings, which is what they started out as. And I don't know, just the story came to me. It wasn't the greatest idea in a sense that the concept is you're on a planet Gideon E, and you're part of an Earth colonization program. And at this point, humans have spread across the universe, or at least the galaxy, the solar system. And you're on this planet called Gideon E, and everything's going all right. You're terraforming, and all of a sudden, this giant ship and a bunch of what appear to be alien robots kind of swoop on down and start to carve up the planet and start to slaughter the colonists, and people are like, "What the hell?" And it turns out that this is a previous Earth colonization program that kind of went awry. They sent the people out, and they had to be so altered, and plus they went on and even altered themselves to make people happy. And when they finally made contact with Earth again, or with their human progenitors, human beings' reaction to them was like, "Oh, you're hideous, go away. How did we even create something or spawn this whole concept?" And they were so rebuffed that it was traumatic for these beings, to the point where they just felt totally rejected by their fellow human beings on a deeply traumatic level. And that turned into, "We hate you. In fact, we hate all humanoids," because all humanoids pretty much go, "Ugh." And let's face it, the Mechanoids are icky. So, so the Mechanoids are now on a rampage. They built up their own society, and as time went by, they decided to hate all human life and humanoids and anyone who allies themselves with humans. And so now they go throughout the universe hunting down humanoid life forms, especially humans, and annihilating them. And basically, this gigantic, planet-sized mothership is here to literally devour that world, Gideon E. and they have the process in which they can do that. And in fact, what they do is they carve up the planet to release, and I mean, literally carve up the planet into chunks and mine all of its minerals and water and other resources. And then once they get down to the core, they're able to convert that into a power crystal. And they just leave the planet just in bits and pieces and fly off to the next one. And that's the basic concept. So the problem, so great concept, great story, cool characters. Everyone loved my designs. The Wasp was a particular favorite, which you got a glimpse of before. And, it was just really well received from an artistic concept wise. Here's a few of the Mechanoids.
Oh yeah.
And it was awesome. And even Mark Miller of Traveler, somehow he got a copy, and he actually sent me a postcard. I have it buried someplace where he's like, dear young new game designer, this is really cool. I love the ideas, love the artwork. Watch your spelling and get yourself an editor. Please, for God's sakes, get yourself an editor. And because I can't spell worth anything. And thank goodness for computer spell checkers and live editors. But it was awesome getting this card from this guy because I knew what Traveler was, and it was the other big game at the time, like the big three back in the day. We're talking 1980, 81, 82 was, of course, Dungeons and Dragons, TSR.
Yeah.
And then Traveler, Game Designer Workshop, and RuneQuest with Chaosium.
And if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure Greg and the Chaosium crew misspelled Glorantha in the first edition of RuneQuest. So it happens. It happens.
But I mean, I'm an atrocious speller. So, we had to do very quickly, we had to do an oops sheet. And I mean, I'm such a terrible speller. And because I would talk about, when I talked about like the animals, the mammal and this and that, there's like, we averaged about 20 mistakes, typos a page.
Oh man.
That's atrocious. But, it was my first effort.
Yeah.
And, so just the concept came up, and and Eric loved it, and he loved my concepts for like the Esper and the Warriors, and this, and the Espers were the psychic class.
Yeah, ESPers, yeah.
That kind of thing. And I wrote it up. And again, I didn't have, so the problem is I grew up poor in Detroit, and I was trying to break in as an artist. So I'm a starving artist, and things are starting to take off, but I mean, I'm barely making ends meet. In fact, I ate so much mac and cheese that I can't stand to eat it.
You ate a lifetime's worth of mac and cheese.
Oh, yeah.
In a very...
Because it was like 25 cents or 30.
Oh, yeah. That was me and ramen. I ate so much ramen. I just like the instant ramen packets. I'm like, I can't. Yeah.
So I had been saving, and I had like $1,500. But I was not nearly enough to get anything published. And, Eric had suggested I do, this smaller world as a serial. So we did, I did most of the artwork. And we had, 3 books that would end up being in the series.
Yeah. Invasion, Journey, and Homeworld.
And, that's the mocked up for it. I have the original art someplace as well. And that's one of the things that carves up the world. I called it a digger, a Mechanoid digger. And so I had the concept. I had the first book written. And I looked into, so my background is comic books. And we had published a, independent comic book. So I knew I had a printer who could print on a newsprint. That's why these pages are all yellowed. And, I could do these print these for 32 cents each at 1,000 copies. So that's a big difference from $2 for
$320 to print 1,000.
Now the problem is they had to print at least 5,000, so I needed some money, and I could circumvent having to hire other artists and things. Although I did have Bill Loebs, William Messner Loebs, did some of the art for me. He was a buddy at the time, one of my defilers. And Eric asked if he could do an adventure. I said, sure. I'm not going to turn down Eric. He's a great writer. And so he contributed to the book, about 8-10 pages. And so I had everything ready to go. I just needed the resources.
Yeah.
And I was having this conversation with Bill Loeb's mom, Frances Loeb's, a sweet lady, beautiful lady. And she said, well, Kevin, how much do you need? And I said, I need like another $1,500. 3,000 bucks would do it. And she's like, well, why don't you work up an agreement? I'll lend you that money. And I was like, holy crap, you'll lend me the money? That's amazing. That would be wonderful. So, I launched Palladium Books with this book and $3,000 and a dream.
Yeah.
And it took off.
So let's kind of like go back in time. So you have the Mechanoid invasion. Like, how did you get it out? Like, did you go to conventions? How did you advertise it? Because we talked a little bit, and we'll get to this in the future. There was a time I came to Palladium through Heroes Unlimited, but I could not open a Marvel comic book, it felt like, without seeing a Riffs advertisement. So
right. Riffs, Turtles, and Robotech. We had
those three.
But those are a few years down the road.
Those are down the line. We'll get there. But how did you advertise it in the early days? It
was rough. I don't even think we advertised in Dragon magazine. That became one of our main. Dragon was just a wonderful resource.
In the early days, when they were much more industry focused as opposed to being sort of just the in-house magazine.
Yeah. They're very industry focused. 80% of it was all, their own stuff, which is fine. But they accepted ads from anybody and everybody. So I was happy to advertise there. But again, I don't have the money to do that with this.
Right.
So what I did is I had gone to a trade show, which is where I met Jordan Weisman. And he saw this book, and it was this book that made him say, ooh, this is the guy to draw, battle droids for FASA. And, we talked about that. That didn't quite happen. But so anyway, I go to the show, and one of the cool things about the show is they had, because it was a trade show, I forget the name of it. It might have been the American Bookseller Show, or it was something smaller, I think. But anyways, they had a list of distributors. Plus, I knew a couple of retailers, and I said, can I get a distributor list? And a couple of them got me some distributor lists, or at least told me who their distributor was and gave me their addresses. And so I sent a copy of this to everybody I could find. And back in the day, there were lots of distributors. 30, 40, 50. And I just sent out free copies with a cover letter and a price sheet and my pitch. And a few people picked us up, just a couple. One of them being the Complete Strategist, which I didn't realize was just a big store in Manhattan, New York City. Danny Kilbert and I became good friends for many, many years. Great guy. Love his store. If you guys ever get a chance, I think it's still there on like 32nd Street and Broadway or something. And I've been there. He actually would bring me in to do talks at his shop like 3 or 4 times. And but anyways, it's just sort of this hole in the wall. It's like this weird long. It's like as wide as my office, but it goes down like 100 feet. And so it's like this long corridor of gaming goodness. And it's quite literally from roof to ceiling, or from floor to ceiling. And he would carry like every flippin' game product back in the day, anyways.
Yeah.
That you could imagine, plus paint and miniatures, and it's a pretty cool shop. But I didn't even know he was just a shop. He would order so much from us eventually that I thought he was a distributor. And when I found out he was a game store, I'm like, what? You're a game store? I got to see this. But that's how we got out. And then, this list also had phone numbers. So, I'm, I guess, bold. I would call them up and be like, hi, did you get my package? And I'd give my little pitch, and they'd be, either like, yeah, send me 10 copies, or go away, kid, you're bothering me. But that's how we got out the initial word. And then, we did a couple of conventions. We did Origins. We did some local show or three. I mentioned in a previous interview about
WinterCon
gamers.
Yeah.
So we would have our, my book. That's all I had at the table, and I would split costs with my buddy Matthew Ballant, who had come out with sort of an independent project that was this. Little weapon. It's just an 8.5 by 11 sheet, much like my Oops sheet.
Yeah.
Just folded in half, but on a nice paper stock, and and he limited it. It was like $4, but he limited like 500 copies, and he was selling it for $4, and I'm selling my Mechanoid Invasion for $3.75, and so I learned a couple of things, and that's the thing is, I didn't know what I was doing. I just, learned as I went along. And one of the valuable lessons that came out of this is two things. For every one of these, Matt was selling 4 or 5 of these.
Okay.
So I was like, okay, I got to figure out why that is.
Yeah.
And then one of the problems with this was the $3.75 price. So I'm a poor kid in Detroit. I'm thinking, part of the pitch was, this is a complete role-playing game. And people would go, for $3.75? What's wrong with it?
Right. People didn't think you valued it. And there's that perception of value. Yeah.
And, it was so below what the typical books cost back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just assumed that it was a piece of crap.
Yeah.
And I could barely get people to even flip through it. So, that was a huge lesson. Look at your market, see what they're charging. It's okay to charge a little less.
Yeah.
20, 30%. But, don't undercut them like crazy, because otherwise there's no perceived value.
Right. And the perception of value is such a huge component of the consumer mind. Yeah.
And then what I realized, and we're kind of jumping ahead, I'll talk about this in our next interview session, but why this was so big is Matt was a big historian.
Those images look very familiar to me.
Do they?
They do.
Because they would turn into our weapons and armor series.
Yeah.
We came back from that first convention, and I'm like, Matt, you're selling these like hotcakes. It's too bad you limited it to 500. He's like, yeah, I know. And I'm like, let's talk. I've got some ideas. But that's for our next episode.
I got to tell you, as a Palladium fan, doing these the History of Palladium Books interviews is. I walked in after our last session. My son was like, "How cool is it that you get to talk to one of the people that you looked up to and like influenced your life?" And like, it's really cool. I can't really. I'm trying to keep my professional facade in place, but sometimes the fanboy breaks through. So
the fanboy breaks through with me too.
Right?
You could be talking about game design or game mastering or any of this stuff.
So obviously, Invasion did well enough that you were able to come up, were able to put together Journey. Did you have the 3 in mind when you started it, or did you just say, "Hey, this is Invasion. It's good enough to start this. If it does well, I'll do a second Mechanoids book."
Yeah, I actually had all three in mind.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, if this didn't sell at all, then the other ones would.
Yeah, obviously.
So yeah. Again, I just had these cool ideas as I was developing this, and so the second one was the journey.
Yeah.
And so the concept is, and that was the other lesson I learned from Mechanoid Invasion, is you can only be nihilistic to a point. The thing that people disliked about this, because they loved the villains, they loved everything about it, but at the end of the book, you die. I mean, the planet Gideon is devoured. It's destroyed. You can't possibly fight the Mechanoid, not this little colony.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh. Yeah. So the journey, and I had this in mind already, but the fact that people died kind of, they didn't want to see more. It's like, I'm dead. What do I care? And I'm like, no, because here's your alternative. The concept behind the journey is that you're able to get inside the Mechanoid mothership, this giant, huge thing. And the Mechanoids are generally very large, quite gigantic, the full main Mechanoids. So the human survivors from Gideon E and other planets that they've chewed up are living between the walls of the spaceship like rats or mice and trying to survive. And they're like the smaller Mechanoids, like the human-sized, they're basically exterminators of humans because they're pests.
I always thought that the Mechanoid trilogy would have been a great sci-fi movie series, right? You end the first one with the destruction of Gideon E, and then you end it with somebody waking up in the walls of the ship and realizing how they got out. And that's our cliffhanger for one. And then the second movie is this great bottle episode, if you will, like we're just inside the walls, survival horror kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also in this book where I introduced bits and pieces of my magic system.
Okay.
Because that was one of the things that kind of gave humans an advantage. Some alien race, if I recall correctly, or some older human race that survived that's on the ship figured out how to use magic. And so you have limited magic capabilities. And so, it's... And that book, by the way, was $4.95. Raised the price a little, and because they're small. I think the page count's bigger. The first one was 48 pages. This is 58, 56 pages, and then Homeworld would be even bigger. It'd be 98 pages. And Homeworld, the concept was that other factions of the human race and their friends and allies, most of whom have been victims of the Mechanoids, they create like this federation that are out to find and destroy the Mechanoids.
Yeah.
And they find out where the Mechanoid homeworld is. And this is the original art for it, by the way. I used to work quite large.
Oh, wow.
So, and I love this piece. I don't know why. It just resonates with me.
It's great.
And so they get to the homeworld of the Mechanoids, prepared to launch this all-out assault. Some people think it's a suicide mission, but they're like, we got to stop them. They're just going through the universe, wiping out the human species. And anyone like them, bipeds in general are just dead meat. And they get there, and the Mechanoids aren't there. And instead, there's a insect, and very much insect, ally race of the Mechanoids that have taken over the planet, and nobody knows what happened to the Mechanoids. It's a big mystery because they have just vanished. And you get to fight the Diani, and you get to explore the Mechanoid world, and that's what that book is. There's some other art that's in it, and it was cool. There's a bunch of cool alien races and weapons, and again, I did all the art. I did the vehicle. Sean was looking at it, and he's like, "Wow, Kev, these are really great."
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, "I did."
So obviously, it did well enough to bring out the Palladium Fantasy game. So how was it received by the time you got to Homeworld?
Well, it was doing all right. Each series sold like 5,000-6,000 copies.
Okay.
And then I did like sort of my happy ending version of the Mechanoids, which kind of collected a bunch of that, added some new material. I give them a dreadnought so they have a chance to win or to fend off the Mechanoids long enough for help to arrive. And it's a wraparound.
Oh, nice.
And that's by me. This was a watercolor piece by me. And, again, it did okay. It's funny, Mechanoids had developed this cult following, and this came out in 85 or 86. And then in more recent years, we kind of re-keylined. But that's why Sean was so excited about the original 3 books, is he said, this is cool. He goes, but you tried to cram everything in there, and the layout's different. It doesn't have the same impact. He goes, I look at this, and I go, yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah,
because
you look at the comics. Yeah.
And he's like, these are great.
Yeah, 100%.
That just shows you how much, design can make a difference.
Well, and the form, right? Art is just as much about the form as it is about the content.
So over the years, Mechanoids have always been a favorite of mine. It's turned into sort of a cult classic. I'm always surprised at how many people are familiar with the Mechanoids. That's why we brought them into Riffs with the second source book.
I was actually just going to bring that up. Source book 2 is where I learned of the Mechanoids, because you brought them into Rifts. They're one of the great enemies that the seers, all of the great prophecies about like how Rifts could end, right? You have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse and Archie, and the Mechanoid invasion is one of these possible
7 dangers. Yeah, that could
7 dangers.
Destroy the world. Yeah.
So why did you decide? Was it just a natural, hey, I've got all this content, or what made you want to pull them into Rifts fairly early on, right?
Well, this is source book 2, so very early on, just like everyone else, I just kind of love the Mechanoids. There's just something cool and creepy about them.
Yeah.
And that's why probably 20 years ago now, one of my guys came up to me and said, "Kev, I love the Mechanoids. I want to write Mechanoid Space." And I'm like, do it. And of course, we kind of talked about that fanboy element. I get excited about my stuff.
Yeah.
And what we're working on. And so I shut my mouth off and announced it. And seriously, it's like 20 years since we announced it. And the guy who wanted to write it, once he dived into it, he's like, I don't know, I got nothing. So, it's like, and I'm got all these other commitments.
Yeah, it's not like you can just pick up somebody else's project and run with it.
Which I have done. I've done plenty of times, but it's like
not for everything.
I want to do it right, and it needs to be epic. And so that was a little disappointing.
Yeah,
but I'm not saying Mechanoid Space is dead. It turns out that Mr. Sean Owen Robertson is a huge fan of the Mechanoids.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we've had some brainstorming sessions. It's nothing that'll be coming out anytime soon, but we got some pretty good ideas for maybe bringing a new epic generation of Mechanoid books in the far-flung future. So
I was going to ask, are we going to see the Mechanoids come up again in Rifts? But obviously, if you've got something epic planned for like Mechanoids as its own thing,
Oh yeah,
I'll be very happy when that one comes out.
yeah. This is going to be its own thing, and we've got some great ideas. Not to get people juiced about it, but we have some great ideas, and whether and when, and we'll get around to it. Like I said, no soon. And if it ever comes out, but I mean, we've got some pretty great ideas, and I think it's kind of becoming Sean's baby for the future. That and a few other things, but so the Mechanoids was just this cool thing, and then part of it with this too is I had this artist, Newton Yule, who had some great ideas on new takes.
Yeah.
On the Mechanoids. So I was like, run with it. Let's see what you come up with. And of course, a lot of the old Mechanoids are in there too. And this advanced a concept that was generated in Homeworld, which was two separate big factions within the Mechanoids developed themselves. Those who hated humans and were much like in Doctor Who, you've got a couple of different races that are just out, especially the Daleks.
Yes.
That are just out to wipe out humanity. So you have that faction of Mechanoids, which we call the aberrant Mechanoids, I think. And then we have the Mechanoids who are like, come on, we can understand why humans are freaked out by us. And we need to make overtures to help the human race, not destroy it. And then those two factions clashed and took their war off someplace into the universe, God knows where, and no one knows which side won or what's going on, or if they wiped themselves out. And in this, you sort of have both the old Mechanoids and the new Mechanoids, and
yeah.
They're kind of still at odds, and of course, the real danger is the Mechanoids that hate human beings. They're the ones that Archie and Hagen have to face and try to stave off. So it's like it turned out the Mechanoid invasion in Rifts turned out to be sort of a secret invasion, a secret war that really only Archie and a handful of heroes, if your player characters, end up helping them,
got involved.
Yeah, know about and were able to stem before they got a real foothold into Rift's Earth. Well, in some games maybe they didn't. Maybe we're all beholden to Mechanoids now. So,
I mean, that is would be a great hook for the start of a new campaign. Hey, no one stepped up, and now Archie is like, I need help.
Yeah.
So one last just questions, because I feel like the original Rifts book especially was very much this, I'm giving up my humanity to save humanity, right? Juicers, crazies, cyborgs, they're all becoming slightly less or other than human, right? You have the all of the magic, the men of magic classes, and all of the the majority of these classes are other from human. And then we get our first two source books, and you've pushed that even further into the cyborgs and robotics and technology side of things. What was kind of going on in your head, in your mind, in what you were reading or absorbing at that time that really was like, hey, all of these things kind of came together and lined up like multiple times in your game design career?
I think a lot of it really is, I find human society and human psychology really interesting. I mean, for example, we have like an equal capacity for good and evil. And sometimes the same person has the capacity to do something wonderful and helpful and magnanimous, and then turns around and slaughters people for his own good, or out of rage or And so there's this interesting dichotomy, which is why, throughout history, there's all these philosophies and yin and yang, and
Yeah.
because human beings are just this weird juxtaposition, this walking incongruity. So I like that. And I always like the idea of human ingenuity and human frailty, and how we're always trying to make ourselves better, but somehow having to deal with our own creations that we often don't think about until it comes back to bite us.
Yeah.
So I'm sure Frankenstein was
Oh yeah,
an influence, because that's kind of similar. Not kind of, it is similar concepts, and various Marvel comics. Because they had all kinds of cool cyborgs and
Deathlock and
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And when even Iron Man, it saves his life, but
yeah,
and so there's a lot of different things. I'm sure iRobot had some influence on that too, and various Heinlein and other science fiction writers. That it's just funny. I just kind of, everything that I've absorbed and loved kind of makes it into my books.
Oh yeah.
Someplace, Alien, certainly, as far as the look and feel, the sort of the dark science fiction. Sometimes the unknown will eat us. That played a factor. The fact that there's like Giger inspired organisms in that book. So certainly, and I was going through that phase too, of which I think a lot of people go through in their youth. I was into that dark and gritty. I loved that Star Wars was gritty, but I loved Alien and Aliens even more because it's really dark and really gritty and focuses on those survival elements. But because of my comic book background, and you see this especially in riffs, even more so, I think, than in Heroes Unlimited. The concept, one of the running themes in riffs is, as you pointed out, human augmentation, and the consequences of it. Does it make you better or does it make you less human?
Yeah. There was a great book by, he did 2 books. There was The Age of Human Machines and The Age of Spiritual Machines by a guy named Ray Kurzweil. And
I heard of this. Yeah. I never read it.
Age of Spiritual Machines. Like I believe he was a computer science guy at MIT, and he predicted like all of the computer advancements within like 5 or 8 years. And so then he's like, well, what's going beyond? And he takes this aside and he talks about how computers, as they get smaller, we're going to start wanting to implant them in our bodies. And he's like, he referenced the Borg, and he's like, everyone's like, how could you ever get there? And he's like, listen, if you tell any parent, hey, your child can have this very simple surgery. It's going to make their memory better. It's going to protect them from disease. It's going to make them stronger and tougher and faster and more resilient and smarter. Every parent's going to be like, sign me up for that. Or, a lot of people are going to be like, sign me up for that. And it's just, it's the incremental sort of, hey, we're to start here. We don't necessarily know where it's going to end up.
Well, and I also, I knew a lot of guys who were into science. I mean, I am too, but I mean, guys are really into science, like Tom Bartold, one of my defilers. And his name will come up numerous times, much like Alex and Eric. Tom was really into science fiction. He was like a computer guy. I mean, he was an engineer at General Motors initially, but he would go on to work on artificial intelligence for the government.
Oh, wow.
So I'm getting that kind of feedback. Eric was he loved all kinds of future stuff. And I'm always getting articles and conversations. Yeah, Kev, have you heard about this? And 8 out of 10 times it's like, no. Let me tell you about it. And we'd go into, some long discussion about God knows what. Space exploration or human augmentation or bionics or robotics or,
Yeah.
artificial intelligence, and it was always fun and fascinating. And I just was like a sponge, I guess. All this shit just kind of went into me and rolled around in my brain, and would come out as different, different things. So
Awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of the Mechanoid chapter of Palladium's history, and then next we're going to talk about the weapons and armor series that I know from the compendium of weapons and armor, and then the compendium of modern weapons. And so, until next time,